Good morning, everybody. It's both a pleasure and a privilege to welcome you all to the Extension Lecture Series 2017 of the Department of History. This is the first of a series of extension lectures planned by the department for this academic year. The theme of the lecture today, Archives and History Writing, is befitting indeed to start with the practice of history today. We have here students, as scholars and teachers of the Department of History, as well as from many colleges and institutions, who have come over here to listen to and interact with a very senior archivist and custodian of one of the largest collections, archival collections in India, Ms. Jayaprabha Ravindran, the Assistant Director of the National Archives of India. She needs no introduction to the community of researchers who have had chances to access the rare archival collections in the repository of the National Archives of India. Her passion for archival collections, pertaining mainly to modern India, turned her into also a consultant on the records and off the records for the leading researchers, as we do read from the acknowledgements of many a published volume on the history of India, modern India, by scholars both from India and abroad. Ms. Jaya has been serving the National Archives of India for the last quarter of a century or so on different capacities. It was her specialization in modern Indian history at the Delhi University that equipped her to be a professional archivist. At a time when professional specialization in history is increasingly, and of course alarmingly I would say, becoming a rarity and a luxury in the departments of archives and archaeology, both at the cadres and at the headquarters, this combination of history and archives becomes all the more significant for all of us who continue to lecture and profess history as a discipline. Her articles on the Indian archives and archival practice appeared in the Journal of the International Council of Archives and the Journal of the SARC Cultural Center. And she officially represented Government of India as well as the National Archives in many international bodies and conferences. As a resource person of the School of Archival Studies of the National Archives of India, and in her capacity as the records manager of the National Archives of India, Ms. Jaya was primarily responsible for organizing many seminars and training sessions for archivists, historians, as well as government officials. On behalf of the Department of History, I extend to Ms. Jaya Ravindran a very cordial welcome to deliver the first lecture in the series of extension lectures to follow this year. Also, I welcome all the researchers and students hailing from various institutions who have come over here to listen to Ms. Jaya about her experiences in archiving history, and also for seeking clarifications from Ms. Jaya on regarding the history in the archives. I have something of an announcement to make in the meantime that was not done earlier as part of the announcements of this lecture. An informal platform of the Department of History that has been encouraging the students and researchers of the department in the exchange of ideas and positions for some time now, is now to become an official platform with the title Dialogues. This is conceived as a free and liberal platform of ideas where students, researchers, and teachers meet for dialogues. It's not for dialogue, but for, I would say, dialogues, which alone would stand in history. All that the rules and regulations of this platform stipulate is that all members of the Department of History are members of the dialogue. And secondly, dialogues would cease to exist the moment it turns out to be a dialogue. That's all. Ms. Jaya has consented to declare this platform formally inaugurated. I also request her, either before she begins her talk or to the end of the talk, to formally declare this body inaugurated. Dialogues, as an announcement I shall make, the dialogues will meet at 1:30 p.m. on the last Thursday of every month with ideas, with books, with scholars, with historians and source materials. Thank you very much. Now I request Ms. Jayaprabha Ravindran to deliver the lecture on archives and history writing. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. I think Professor Francis is already in. I know there's a problem because of my height, you're not able to see me. Can I stand like this or? It's my words actually. Like what Professor Francis said, it's really an honor for me that I've been asked to declare Dialogues, the interactive platform for all of you as part of your history department, or even others who are, I think others can also join in, to declare the platform Dialogues formally open. And I hope this is the starting point, because what I was telling Professor Francis is that let this not be a formal lecture. It will be much more interesting if you have questions on which I can answer one after the other. I think that would help you more than what I'm going to talk about. Anyway, let me start. He has introduced me, but how many of you have heard of National Archives of India? Can I just ask you that? Not many, understandably, because you are far away in Kerala, but let me just tell you, even for those people who are staying in Delhi, if you tell the auto driver also that you want to go to National Archives of India, I'm sure that 90% of them won't know. Although this is a building that has been standing there since 1927, but unfortunately not many people know what is National Archives of India. So that is something that is the bane of archives. People don't know what is archives. So to begin with, as the representative of National Archives of India, I am standing here as the student director of National Archives of India. It's my duty to tell you about National Archives in brief. In between, I will be talking to you about archives. But this is a repository of permanent category records which was set up way back in 1891, 11th March 1891 in Calcutta. You know Calcutta, it was the erstwhile capital of British India. And that's where the British government decided that there should be a centralized archives. What is archives? As you've just seen, people don't know about archives. People don't know about National Archives of India. How many of you had heard about archives before coming to the history department, or say even otherwise? Archives. You have heard about it because nowadays, especially in news channels and all, whenever any old footage or anything is shown, they'll write that term archive. Otherwise, I don't think people would have used archives or heard about archives, which is natural because archives is, compared to museums, archives is lesser known because the only people who want to use the records or want to conserve the records would use it, would go to that place. Museum is something different. People want to see what is there. Like everyone is fascinated by what is kept in a museum. But if you visit an archive, you should know what exactly you're going to look for. It's not like a place where everything is exhibited. You should know what you're looking for. So anyway, as I said, National Archives, and one thing I just want to start off with, I want to tell you right in the beginning, I am not a professional teacher. So maybe the flow of what I'm telling you may not be like what Professor Francis does, There may be in between, some stoppages or in between. Anyway, that is okay. I think that you can understand. But let me just start off. So as I just mentioned, the terminology archives is not known to people. Common people are not affected by what is in an archive, so they don't want to know about it. And another important thing is only people who can read and write will visit an archive. So that is another aspect. In the state of Kerala, like Kerala, it's not an issue. Almost everyone is literate and educated and very well aware. But that is not the story in other parts of the country, in the other parts of our country. Anyway, when we talk of archives, from where did this terminology archives come? You can trace the terminology way back to during the Latin period and the Roman period. In Latin, it was called archivum. The term archives is derived from the Latin term archivum, or from the Greek terminology. There are different schools of thought regarding that. Archivum. Archivum basically says that anything related to power, anything reflecting power of an authority, and it also mentions that these are records which are kept in a place. So anything which is related to power will also say that records which are kept in a place, that is also called an archive. So it is used for both the records as well as the place where the archives are kept. So it has a dual meaning. So when we say archive, we are going to the archive, that is the place where records are kept. It is also used for the records which are kept. It's used in. But let me also tell you, we generate lots of records, but not all records become an archive. That is another story. Because you cannot imagine a scenario that everything that is written will be retained permanently. Like what you are texting nowadays. Nowadays everyone is into texting, WhatsApp, SMS. Can you imagine retaining everything? But some you may retain. What is retained permanently will become an archive ultimately. That is exactly what happened earlier also. One thing is very clear, that anything which is kept in an archive, it is associated with power. So anybody who was in control of those written records were powerful. So in fact, when you look back at history, like the temples were the centers of power. Because the priest over there, they were the literate class, whether it was in Indian context or Egyptian or Greek or anything, the priests were the powerful people. Why? Because they could read and write, they were the ones who were creating archives. So the archives is in a way associated with power. And the terminology has been described by International Council on Archives, that is the international body related to archives and everything related to archives, as records which are generated by an individual or an institution as part of their business dealings or as part of their official dealings, so anything which is telling anybody about their interactions or about their correspondence, which can be used as proof of their official dealings. That is called as archives. Okay, and it can be used as evidence in any international court or even any legal procedure. Now, what is the use of archives? Why are archives so important? Why is archives so important? Or rather, how are the archives so important if it is something which is old? In the context of what I am going to tell you now is purely in the context of Indian government, because I have more experience of working in the government sector. So I can tell you that, but this is generally an accepted thing. Archives are mainly used for administrative purposes. The bureaucrats, the public figures like prime ministers, presidents and all, or the ministers, they can always use for the records which are kept in an archives. Why? Because the older records give references to happenings, similar happenings, and how it would have been dealt with earlier. Like it acts as a kind of precedence. I'll give you some example. We had this demonetization, which was a very important issue. All of a sudden, our life was turned upside down. So before this happened, or rather immediately after that, so many issues came up. So where did these bureaucrats look for these records? They had to look up the records which are in the custody of National Archives of India, because we are the custodians of Government of India. Similarly, we have, I don't know how many of you are keeping abreast with what is happening on a day-to-day basis in our politics or international scenario. We have this standoff with China, Doklam issue. Doklam issue is nothing new. Look back at the history. Because of our unique geographical positions, we have always had problems with China, our border areas. whether it's British colonial period or post-independence period. So when this Doklam issue came up, and before the National Security Advisor went to have meeting with his counterpart in China, they looked for records in National Archives of India. And we were able to cull out material of say 1965 after the Chinese War. We have a lot of it, and it's exactly the same thing which has happened. That's why we keep saying that history repeats itself. So it's nothing new. But these people will have an idea how it was dealt with then. Is there anything else that can be done beyond what was done earlier? How is the status quo to be maintained? For a precedent, the bureaucrats depend upon records here. You can think of any issue, like how to check communal rights. Gujarat, like we have had history of communal rights. We have had history of communal rights related to Ayodhya. During the British time also, Ayodhya was a major issue. Why is it that the British were able to control it, or how did they control it? All these things are stories, or rather they become stories if you look up the records. How is it that they were able to maintain calm in that area? So for the administrators, it is very important that they refer to these old records. And of course, suppose the government decides to build a railway line across Garhwal Hills. Any new line that needs to be laid down, there needs to be surveys done. So much new effort has to be made. The first thing they do is they look for precedent. Was any survey done earlier? And where will they find these records? Obviously in the archives. And as the custodian of archives, we know that we have survey records related to language, survey records related to population, any new dams being built up, or any railway lines being laid up. All these things, these survey records are there. Linguistic survey records are there. So for the bureaucrats, it's imperative that they look up these records which are in the archives. And this is the bureaucrat that I am talking to you. Apart from the bureaucrats, we have records which could be of interest to, say, researchers, historians. If you look up the trends of history, I'm sure you'll agree with me as professors that it's no longer the macro level history that is being made, it's micro level. And micro level history also, many of these things you won't find anywhere, even in the secondary sources you may not get. So, but in archives, if you give us the time and if you're ready to spend time in the archives, I'm sure that you'll get material related to places, events, anything. You just have to have the patience and the time. That's what I always tell anybody who visits archives. Please don't come for 1 or 2 days. You must have at least a week or 10 days. Without that, because even know about archives, it takes time. But it is like an ocean. You just should be patient enough, and I'm sure you will be able to come up with something really unique. So for the information of any kind, whether it be a person, a personality, an event, anything, archives is the place. And another thing I want to tell you, I also mentioned it earlier, records which are in any archives, any legally established archives, they have a legal value, in the sense the records can be used as evidence. I'll tell you, like land records. Then in the context of that is something which is unique in National Archives of India. You know about the partition of our country and the major population shift. The migrants who came from Pakistan, they left without a penny in their hands. They have left behind their places, their houses, their land, everything was there. And when they came here, there was a separate department dealing with this rehabilitation. And these people had to give details of their claims, what they had left behind. Once they had given those claim forms, it was validated with their counterpart in Pakistan, and these people were allotted land or given monetary compensation. That is the major function of rehabilitation division. And imagine 70 years after that, but now legal issues are coming up. Because what has happened is, many a time, at that time joint family system was there. Families moved en masse, like one grandfather and his 3 sons with their families. They would have been given one piece of land. But over the years, the families would have shifted out, and the places where these people were given compensation in Delhi, considering the value of land or even a small flat, they are worth crores now. So now the brothers or their grandchildren, they don't want to leave a single penny. So they are trying to find out, what was the compensation received by the grandfather, and using these records, they are able to lay claim. And we have a lot of court cases where records are called for from National Archives of India. So this is one example that I gave. Similarly, you know very well about Mullaperiyar issue. Tamil Nadu and Kerala both are involved in that. Unfortunately, nobody came from Kerala, but Tamil Nadu people definitely came. And I was just wondering why nobody has come. They have got the records, now it's up to them. The same record can be used or misused by people as per their wish. Like historians, I'm sure, the same record can be interpreted in different ways by different schools of thought. So that's exactly how it is. Now I come to another thing. Like when I talk of archives, till now I've been talking to you about the National Archives of India or the government records. But now there is much beyond what is considered to be the public records. There are different forms of archives. We have the public archives or the government archives. We have private archives or the private papers. We have business archives, oral archives, audiovisual archives, newspaper archives, and ecclesiastical records or archives. Now when we come to public records or the public archives, as you said, the major one I've already talked to you about, that is the National Archives of India. But considering our federal structure, you know that we have a central government, we have the state governments. And the subject of archives comes under the concurrent list. You know about the list, no? The three different lists, so this comes under the concurrent list. I don't want to test anyone's knowledge, it's just sharing of information, so please don't be offended. So in a federal structure like ours, we have the central government archives with the National Archives of India, and we have around 18 state archives. Some of these archives, some of these states are yet to come up with their archives. Like Northeast, there are some states which don't have an independent archive, but they are trying to create their own archives. Otherwise, most of these states have their own archives. Then another thing I want to tell you is archives always follows the flag. Like suppose a state is divided, like we have Telangana and Andhra Pradesh now. The records which were in the custody of erstwhile Andhra Pradesh or the present day Telangana, they remain where they are. They'll remain in Hyderabad. Like you know that most of the records related to Kerala, they were not in Trivandrum. They were in Chennai. Why? Because it was all part of Madras Presidency. The archives remain where they are supposed to be there. After that, there is an agreement between different states or countries or whatever it is, and we can ask for copies. That's a mutual agreement. Like when Pakistan became separate, whatever records were there in Lahore, they remained there. Whatever is with us, we have the major chunk. In fact, there were efforts that we should be able to share, and we should share our records with them. But somehow archives has not been a priority for most of the governments till now. So Pakistan has not bothered to ask us, and we have also not bothered to give them. But there are these citizens who are now really bothered. Because there are the common people who are affected. They want to know about their roots in Pakistan. And it's not easy. It's not easy for historians. I don't know if any of you have ever tried that. This is what I come to know, that it's not easy to get a research visa to enter Pakistan. Similarly, I know for sure that people from Pakistan are not welcome in India because it's not easy for them to get. In fact, I've had, this is just offbeat dialogue that I'm going to share with you. One Pakistani military personnel, he had retired, but he was heading one of the Sainik schools, so-called Sainik schools in Pakistan, and he wanted to come and do some research on Sainik schools in India. Everything was done, but at the last moment, government of India decided not to give him access. He had come to India also, then he had to go back. So it's not easy. But on the other hand, there is another way out. Pakistanis who become UK nationals, they don't, they come to us not as Pakistani nationals, but they come to us with a UK citizenship, so they get access. Anyway, so this is just offbeat information that I have to share. Archives follow the flag, so the archives wherever they are, they remain there. If the other country or the state wants to have any copy, they are to be shared. That is the presumption. Now let's come to private archives. What do you understand by private archives? These are archives in private custody. Basically, you can say so. Some of these archives in private custody, but basically they relate to records of an individual or a private institution. It could be anything like a correspondence, it could be speeches by the person, it could be writings by the person, or anything that has been collected by him. It could be photographs, it could be, some people are passionate about stamps collection. Anything that has been collected by a person or a private institution. But as far as the private institution is concerned, it could be related to the growth of that institution. But as far as the person is concerned, it could be his passion that, like I'll give you an example. We have private papers of most of our national leaders. You know about Gandhiji. He had a passion for writing. Whatever piece of paper he could lay his hands on, he would write on that. I mean, although collected works of Mahatma Gandhi has come up, 100 volumes plus the supplementary, still there are papers coming up. Just 2 days before I came, I got an email saying that one person has a letter written by Mahatma Gandhi to his grandmother, who was a translator for him in Chennai. Whenever he visited Chennai, this lady used to be with him, and she would be, religiously translating all this from his Hindi or English to Tamil. So at the end of during one of his visits, probably he was going back and he wrote a letter to her. So that is, anything written by Mahatma Gandhi is priceless for Government of India, and Government of India always does everything to lay its hands on. And of course, as National Archives of India, we get them. So similarly, you have private papers of Rajendra Prasad, G.V. Pant, Sardar Patel. Sardar Patel, unfortunately, although he is the Iron Man, he has so much to contribute. He has contributed so much, but he didn't leave behind those personal notes. Whatever are there are, they say, his replies to letters that he very official. Nothing that his thoughts you won't get anywhere. So there is a gap. Unlike Gandhiji, whatever, if he was annoyed with somebody, he would write it. Sardar Patel wouldn't write it. Similarly, we have Jawaharlal Nehru. I'm sure those of you have seen Jawaharlal Nehru papers. They'll know that he was passionate about maintaining his own records. He had a wonderful handwriting and his English was impeccable. And he would, apart from the official dealings, if you see his personal papers, you have those diaries, small month-wise diaries. You don't get those kind of diaries nowadays. In those diaries, I myself, because I was associated with Timothy earlier, I have gone through those diaries, and what do they tell you? They tell you about the number of clothes he would have given to the washerman. Like we call them dhobi. Every week he would send his clothes for, I'll take it, it's okay. Just keep it. So those are private thoughts. They also reflect upon the person concerned. So private papers could be anything. It could be his correspondence, the speeches, anything collected or written by a person. Some of them had a passion for, collecting photographs, newspaper clippings. We have a leader called M.R. Jayakar. M.R. Jayakar, so long as he was active, he was almost like an archivist. He has these diaries where, topic-wise, whatever newspaper items were coming on a particular, like Quit India Movement, any newspaper item coming up on the Quit India Movement or related to that, he would take a printout, take the newspaper clipping, paste it, give the date, give the name of the newspaper. So those are all, these are things you wouldn't find easily, and it's very useful. And why are these private papers so important? For historians, as you would all agree, for any objective writing of history, you can't just depend on one source material. I know that there are people who just depend on published material. I got a footnote so you can use that and write your own paper, but that is not actual research. For researching, you have to consult, apart from the public records, other sources of information, other archival materials. The private source supplements what is given in public records. The private thoughts of a person. As I said, if somebody is writing an autobiography of Amrita Shergill, apart from what is given in public records, her private thoughts about her life, where will you find it? In her own personal collection or in the letters she had written to somebody else. Similarly, you can name anybody. There will be private papers here and there. It's up to you from where you're going to search it out. Now we come to another category of archives. These are the business archives. This is something not very popular, I should say, because not many people have been using them. These are business archives. Business archives includes all information or rather everything related to a business house. Business house could be companies, could be banks. When you talk of business houses, right from the setting up of a business house, like even the conception of an idea that you're going to set up a company or whatever it is, you start interacting with people. So maybe you'll write letters to different people, you'll get their comments. Ultimately, this person who is doing it, he'll start keeping all those letters. So that is where the idea is mooted. Then how do they go about it? Do they register the company? Do they apply for grants? Do they apply for land? Land is required. Everything related to a business setup, that becomes part of an archive. And as I have already mentioned, National Archives of India happens to have one of the biggest business archives records. That's the East India Company records. If you see the records of East India Company, they came here as a company and how they slowly expanded. Their ledgers are there. They set up, initially they had set up factories. In fact, I'll also tell you that our record series, the regular record series start only from 1748 onwards. But they had come to India around 16 after the setting up of the East India Company. They came here much earlier. So we have, and when they came, they started setting up factories. The Surat and the Anjego, Cambay, all these factories are there. But factory records we don't have. But factory records will be telling you much more about their activities as a pure company. What we have are basically records where they've already started making inroads into the politics. They want to throw away the French, they want to throw away the Dutch, and how they were manipulating the local chieftains or rulers, how their interactions with them, how they were trying to monopolize the trade, and what all the gifts were they giving to the local Raja. All those things you'll find in the British East India Company records. It's really interesting, but another thing it's not easy to read those records because they are manuscripts. To read the calligraphic writing of Britishers, it's not easy. Anyway, we have the records, so if any of you want to see those records, you're most welcome. Apart from that, post-independence period, or rather pre-independence only, some of the business houses who are still going very strong, like Tatas, they have everything related to the Tatas. That is there in the public records, as also their own Tata Central Archives. Now, Tata Central Archives is in Pune. What they're doing is, apart from their own records, what they have in hand, they've started collecting information from different sources. Like just 1 week before, they're going to celebrate 150 years next year. So we are into a collaboration with Tata Archives. And I have found that we have records related to Tatas way back, going way back to 1892. There may be something before that also, but that is the earliest record that I could lay my hands on. Maybe there's something else. And archives and Tatas, another information I'll share you. When archives was built in Delhi, Tatas provided this team. Yes. Our stack area is built up with Tata Steel where Tata Steel stamping is there. And when the Tata people came there, they were thrilled, the original steel beams and all with Tata stamped on it. That was really an experience. So apart from Tata's, we have so many other business archives like Godrej, DCM or the Sree Group, then DLF, the builders. I'm sure each and every company that is in existence now, they'll be having their record. It's a different, generally people will think, yeah, they will be only having those financial records. It's not so. Many of these people would be having other activities. There's something called CSR, company social responsibility, that is the new terminology being used now. But philanthropic activities have been there since time immemorial. Some of them have been building hospitals, some of them have been investing heavily in education. So all this kind of information you'll get from these kind of business archives. But where will you get these business archives? National Archives of India, we just have these East India Company records. Individually, these people have started setting up their own archives. And they're also giving access to the people who want to do research on it. It may not be easy like National Archives or any state archives, but you can approach them. Until date, from what I know, they don't charge anything, but it's just that the procedural requirement. You have to approach them. So that is, in case any of them are interested in economic history, that should be the place. And of course the banks. SBI, RBI, PNB, Syndicate Bank, they also have their archives. And again, RBI and all, right from the beginning of Imperial Bank of India, you have records in National Archives of India. So anything which is there in business archives, you can always corroborate that with the public records. Because no bank would have been set up without an official support, whether it's colonial period or post-independence period. Now I come to another very, very important category of records or archives, audiovisual archives. Now, in audiovisual archives also, we have two distinct groups. One is the oral archives. I'm sure some of you have all used oral archives or are familiar with the oral archives. Have you heard of oral archives? No, it's okay. Oral archives is something which is really coming up in a big way. Oral archives are basically sound recordings or transcripts of these sound recordings. And oral archives are basically planned interviews. The concept of oral archive, although we have, in India we have had a very strong tradition of oral, sharing of information right from our ancient period, Shruti, Smriti and all that. But the proper centralized archiving of oral sources, that started somewhere in 1954 in the University of Columbia. Professor Alan Norman is the person who started it. And in India, it came sometimes in, you can say, in 1960s. Nehru Memorial Museum and Library is the one which started it. And what they started doing is, they started focusing on people who were associated with the freedom movement. Anybody and everyone, mostly important leaders. At that time, many of these leaders were alive also. So they started interviewing these national leaders or people who had contributed in the freedom struggle. The interviews were conducted and then they were transcribed, because you can't allow a scholar to go through the original tape again and again. So they transcribed this material and that became part of the oral archives. This is one major thing. But it has some flip side also. Like, after all, you are interviewing a person and maybe 40-50 years after an event has happened. And we all have our own flaws. None of us are perfect. We may have our own bias. We may have our own memory lapses. We may not remember things as they were. So, anybody who is using our oral archives, you have to remember that you are reading the interview of a person, of a human being, who will have all these flaws. Not everyone would be like Gandhiji, who will be talking about everything. And I'm not sure. I can't be sure. There are different schools of thought on his autobiography also. But definitely you have to remember that everything that is given in an oral archive cannot be taken on its face value. You have to corroborate the material. But it is also important that to remember that whatever is given in public archives or in the official records, that will be the factual part. Like suppose we are in Kerala, you know about communism, you know about the communist leaders. We have very few records related to communist movement or the communist leaders. The negative part of communist leaders may be given in the colonial period records, how they were problematic or whatever it is, their role in the freedom struggle and all that. But if you want to find out about individual leaders, it will not be easy. Like even their private papers may not be there because they never kept any record, private papers. They would always destroy it. But how to know about it? Now, of course, it's a different story altogether. The only way out would be you start interviewing these people who had participated in the communist movement. That would be an interesting form of information. And you corroborate that with the other sources of information like the public records or newspaper clippings and other. Apart from the oral archives, you have other audio archives. These are the sound recordings. Sound recordings, say, planned speeches of leaders like our president, our prime minister, the speaker. They all give planned speeches on different occasions. They are also oral archives. If you go through these speeches, they tell you about the progress made by the country over a period of time, or if there is a in case of any national emergency, they'll address the nation. That is also a planned speech. Apart from these, you also have sound recordings kept by the music companies. Music is another source. If somebody wants to write history of a particular musician or the form of music, how it has changed over a time period, he or she has to depend on these music archives. And these are also archival sources, for a person who wants to research on that. So, and where will you get these kind of recordings? In music companies. They maintain their own archives. So that is another source. Now we come to the visual archives. In visual archives, you have photographs, you have films, you have newsreels, documentaries, paintings, murals, all these are all visual archives. When you talk of, I think I've already done this. Oh, no. Photographs, when you talk of photographs, where will you find these photographs? Do you know of any photograph archives? Any archives specializing in photographs? Pardon? Did somebody say something?
Film and Television Institute.
Yes, that is one place. That's where you get the moving pictures. For photographs, we have primarily, especially related to the national movement, you have Nehru Memorial Museum and Library. Then you have PIB, Press Information Bureau. That unfortunately these are all based in Delhi. Press Information Bureau has its own archives. Then for films, you have National Film Archives. National Film Archives is the compulsory archives for all the films that are produced. That's in Pune. For films, newsreels, documentaries, you have another source, that is the Films Division of Ministry of Information and Broadcasting. That's in Bombay. Okay, so anybody wants to use them, you can approach them. These are government institutions, so there shouldn't be any problem. In fact, for newsreels and documentaries, we also have in National Archives of India, there are one or two film archives, film clippings are there. One is the only surviving clipping related to the immersion of Gandhi's ashes. That was in National Archives of India. But apart from that, in other archives across the world, there are a lot of information. And for paintings, you have National Gallery of Modern Art. That is one place where the paintings are there. But apart from that, you have private custodial institutions. Like photographs also, Al-Qazi Foundation. Paintings also, I understand they have them. But paintings mostly are in private custody. Many of the royal families have their own museums where they have kept their own set of paintings. They are not sharing it as their. Murals again, most of the murals are on the temples and other places, so you can't say that it is all kept in one place. I wish somebody would photograph them and bring them all under one roof. Now, I was telling you about oral archives. I already told you what is oral archives. Let me just tell you about where all these oral archives are available. I mentioned about Nehru Memorial Museum and Library. That's where you will get records related, oral archives or transcripts related to the national movement. Apart from that, we have P.C. Joshi archives, which is specializing in, Shiva knows about it, it specializes in communist movement. So, isn't it? Yeah, so, anything related to the communist movement or the communist leaders, they are the ones who are trying to transcribe it and conduct oral interviews and transcribe them for the benefit of researchers. Then we have VV National Labour Institute, that's in Noida. They are specializing in labor history. For labor history, I'm sure you'll understand that most of the labor leaders, or even the labor leaders, I don't think they would be leaving behind much of written material. So for the tapping the sources or for tapping the information that they have, the only way out is interview them. And for participants of labor movement, no movement is successful without grassroots support. So especially for people who had participated in any of these major labor activities, the only source could be interviews, and Vivigiri National Labour Institute is doing that job. They are trying to collect as much interviews as possible. And again, the flip side, I've already said, there are problems of human memory, individual bias, all those things. I'll just give you an example. I was in Nehru Memorial Museum and Library for some years, and I was associated with the oral archives. And while interviewing, the laid down procedure is that when you're talking, and most of these people were very old, people who had participated in the national movement. So we were told right in the beginning, whatever the person is saying, let him speak. Don't interrupt them. Because if he comes to know that you know more than him, or you're trying to tell him that this is not right, they'll just keep quiet. They won't progress. So let them say whatever they want. So we have had people who are around 80, 90 who will say that quit in a moment of 1932. So we let them speak. Only while you're transcribing and while you're editing, you make that note. You are not supposed to interrupt them. So this is about the human memory. We have to remember that everyone will not remember everything correctly. Apart from the archival sources I told you about, Indira Gandhi Press Information Bureau, and also in Indira Gandhi National Center for Arts, they have also started now collecting some of these visual archival material. But of course, what they're doing is they're trying to digitize everything. In National Archives of India, we have lithoprints of some of these paintings, like Daniels, Hodges. Raja Ravi we don't have. It is mostly in Kerala, I think we have it. But Rabindranath Tagore in Calcutta we have. Anyway, what I am telling you, there are different sources for all these different archives, and if you want to do anything, like especially nowadays, history is not just written material. People try to bring in visuals also to make it more interesting. Also, this is the time period where many of these institutions are trying to come up, or rather commemorate their 100th anniversary or 50th anniversary by coming up with something called a coffee table book. Coffee table books are being planned by income tax department, by the police department. You name it, and everybody seems to be doing it, including National Archives of India. We have come up with some. And for that, you don't need writers. The photographs speak for themselves. Just one line and it makes very interesting. So those of you who are not interested in income tax department also, but if you see the coffee table book, I'm sure you're going to be very much interested. Then I come to another form of archive, that's the newspaper archives. Newspaper archives, which was the first newspaper in India? Bengal, yes. Okay, Sanskrit. Uh, do you think the newspaper of that time period is also available? I don't think Bengal Gazette is available, but definitely we have newspapers from 1850s onwards. Like in National Archives of India, we have newspapers of the military, and I shouldn't be using that term, the first war of independence, 1857. It's in Urdu. There are in fact 2-3 newspapers, Delhi Urdu, Akhbar, and mostly in Urdu. So they are of that time period, 1850s, 1857, 59. But apart from that, for the rather from 19th century you can say, Nehru Memorial Museum has taken up as a project microfilming of whatever newspapers they are able to acquire from whichever part of the country or the world. So they have a lot of newspaper archives in different languages. In Malayalam, like you have Deepika and Kerala Gamadi and Manorama and all that. So anybody who doesn't get it in Kerala, that is the place you should visit. And of course, now that in reader print copies are also provided, it becomes easy. From the microfilm you identify. And we are trying to go one step ahead and go for digitization. In National Archives, apart from these Urdu Akhbar, we have few newspapers. That's not our mandate actually to collect newspapers. Whatever newspapers are there in our custody, that is as part of our private papers collection. Now we come to another group of records or archives called Ecclesiastical archives. These are archives maintained by various religious institutions. Like, you know that temples have their own archives, churches have their own archives, mosques, of course, I understand they also mean, they would be maintained. What kind of records do you think will be available here? You know, when I started off in archives, when people used to come to me for, especially the foreign nationals, many of them had connection with British India, and they would come to us with queries like, we are trying to trace the birth record of our great-grandfather who was born in Chennai. And it became, when I can't find something in archives, then I start searching, where could it be? And I found that, churches are one place where these records are maintained. And these churches have birth and death record, they have baptism record, they have marriage records, everything related to a person. Apart from that, they also give information on their other activities, social religious activities like setting up of schools, how they were helping the poor, hospitals, especially the churches. You know about the missionary activities. Missionary activities, we have a lot of records, how the missionaries came into the country, and what was the British intention in bringing in the missionaries. What was the, all those things, the policies that went behind in encouraging missionaries to enter India. Those records are here. That is one aspect as far as the government. But the actual activities of the church and whether they were being financially helped or how they were generating, how they were sustaining themselves, all those records will be in the individual religious houses. I'm sure some of you know that Padmanabha Swami Temple, the Kajan records. I recently came because to be very frank, I'm blank about Kerala history because I'm not studying here. But I understand that the records of Padmanabha Swami Temple, they are like daily happenings. Whatever came to the temple, whatever offerings came there in a day, on a date-wise basis, everything is listed there, including their activities. Their, what the royal family was, what declaration, what orders were being, everything, because the royal, the king was ruling on behalf of Sri Padmanabha Swami. So everything is part of the temple records. So similarly, there might be some other temples also who are maintaining that kind of records. I know for sure, like this is a university exclusively devoted to Sanskrit. You have a history department. I don't know if any of you are specializing in Sanskrit or if you have any background. There are some records of Sri Sankaracharya in Sree in some other places also. So these manuscripts are available. These are interesting records. They will tell you about that particular religious institution, how it came about, and what were they focusing on. religious records are used to a large extent for tracing your family, genealogical studies. For that, these are very important. And I'll also tell you about Hindu temples, especially of North India. We have something called the Panda records. Like the Pandits of places like Haridwar, Rishikesh and Varanasi, they have something called the Panda records. Like if I go there now, I'll just go to I have to find out the Pandit dealing with South India, Kerala, and they'll lead me to that person and they'll ask, what is your family name or whatever it is. And they'll trace out whether my grandfather had visited that. They'll just take out that Panda record. Yeah, you haven't seen that one. Panda records are very important, especially for North Indians, they do this, they religiously follow that. And Panda records, we have around 5,000 microfilm rolls of Panda records collected from different religious places, like as I mentioned, Varanasi, Rishikesh, Haridwar. And who did this microfilming? It's very interesting. It was not an Indian effort. It was done by the Genealogical Society of Utah. They are the one. The Americans spent money to microfilm our Panda records, and they are working on it. So it's more than us. It's the foreigners who are working on our genealogical. In so many years that I've spent in archives, just 1 month back, I got somebody asking for the Panda records, an Indian person, and I was so happy that I told him, please show me exactly how, because he said, you can't read them. They're basically symbols. So he said one symbol would lead you to the page concerned. So I told him, please let me know how it is written, because I will never get to see them. Now I have talked to you about different forms of archives, and initially I asked you whether you had heard about archives. Who are the users of archives? It's very, very clear that, since a long time, archives was meant for people who could read and write, and that too for researchers, and that too for historians. That was the concept. If you look at the British time period, the Britishers were very hesitant in opening their records, because they wanted archives to be there exclusively for their administrative purpose. And considering the kind of opposition they were having, they were not open to the idea that Indians should see what is given in their archives. So they didn't want Indians to go through these archives. This continued for a long time. There were long debates within the bureaucratic level. Ultimately, it was as late as 1934 that they allowed Indian researchers to consult these. And at that time, it was purely historians. Because their fear was that if these people get to see these records, they can interpret it for their own national movement. And they didn't want it. They wanted that their records should not be used in any way which will harm them. But the initial group of historians who consulted them, we had Professor Jayaprabha Ravindran and all, they were instrumental in pushing ahead, and they wanted more and more liberalization. But this continued like that for quite some time. And in 1934 you had only around 25 people accessing these, Indians accessing these records. By 1947, I have records from 1947 onwards. From 1947, as per our report, it was only 52. And by 2017, it's around 1,500. These are the number of registrations, number of people who are registering to access these records. But still, I'll say the number is not that much compared to Europe and America, where archives is for, it's used like any other library. People use it that freely. Local archives, county archives, all those things. People are aware of what is an archive, but in India, that's not the case. In India, of course, as I said, the initial thought process, or even nowadays, the general concept is that history work. I mean, people who are doing history, they know what it is. But that's definitely not the case. Professor Francis mentioned about the article that I had written for ICA journal, It was basically on the records in National Archives of India, the changing trends of archives. And that is basically what I connected was that as the government policies liberalized, the people who are consulting archives is also widening. The character of the people who are concerned in archives is all. It's no longer just historians. We have economists, we have media persons, we have painters, we have even chefs, we have scientists. We had, in fact, Professor Ravindran, he was one of the scientists who had come to us. We have had Gopal Krishna Gandhi, Arun Shourie, all these people. Jayaprabha Ravindran just recently has completed his book on Mrs. Gandhi. He has used archives. So you have a variety of people. To add to these, after the RTI Act, we have these common people who are coming on, the common citizens. And as I said, how they're using the property related records. Most of them have some intention in using archives. It's not, very few people come there out of their own interest. Like Professor Rajaramana, he wanted to find out about his village. That was just pure personal research. He was not doing anything related to science. But even on science or any development, like what I was saying, archives is so huge. It's like an ocean. You just have to name it and you get it, except for say nuclear science or something, atomic power or something. Otherwise, you'll find information on each and every, any subject that you want to talk about, you get material. That is the kind of information that is there. Now, I mentioned just a few minutes back that access, how the British were restrictive in their access. Post-independence, immediately after independence, as early as 1952, in the Parliament, there was a private member's bill seeking a legislation to streamline the record management activities of government of India. That was the demand. That like other countries, we should also have a legislation to streamline the activities of government of India, the record management activities, and the archive should be brought under that legislation. There was an assurance in the floor of the Parliament, but from 54, it was only as late as 1993 that we came up with the Public Record Act. And then, but by then, so much there's been so much of changes by then. World over, so much information sharing attitude has changed. The government is opening up its ideas. Everything is on a run. So we have the IT Act of 2000, which still said that more and more records should be digitized and it should be accessible. The cherry on the cake is the RTI Act of 2005, which just took away any kind of restriction. It says that we are a democracy and whatever the government is generating, any institution which has any kind of financial help from government of India is covered under the RTI Act. So it's like even educational institutions, if their land has been allotted by government or if they've got a subsidy for anything, they are covered under RTI. Hospitals, covered under, if they've been given land or if they are getting any funds for import of equipment, they're all covered under RTI. It's like almost everything is covered. So obviously archives will also have to open up. So right now, in fact, we are struggling with two legislations. We have the Public Record Act 1993 and the RTI Act of 2005. But one thing is for sure, everything has changed. It's no longer restrictive. We are allowing more and more people to visit the archives. Now, I'll just tell you, I'm the CPIO for records. I look after the public records, I look after the private papers and the library. So practically all the record aspects of National Archives of India